Hi, Udita. Thank you for joining us from Berlin and in these, well, fairly weird circumstances for us. Zoom is not the only strange thing happening here. Um,
No, no.
okay, Udita, so tell me, tell us about how did you decide firstly to on the subject of the film, right? Because it's a fairly complicated subject matter to deal with. This is your first film, you've written it, you've directed it. And I'm just curious as to how did you decide on the subject matter and also what kind of research went into it. The one thing that I wanted to also mention, and
Yeah,
I'm curious,
yeah.
that I know that you grew up in Indore, which is very much part of the central Indian landscape. And did this also, in turn, this kind of physical proximity to what was happening at some point of time, did this also affect you? Did this also impact the decision while you were looking for a subject matter?
Yeah, well, there are two or three things. Like, basically, I set out to answer this question, where I'm from, because obviously, this is a question that was posed to me very often or too often in Berlin. Like you're always kind of the outsider. You're always being asked, where are you from? And then you say, okay, I'm from Indore, and nobody really knows what Indore is. And then, you're always like kind of trying to locate yourself, and that's very difficult, especially if you want to give a nuanced answer, and that's not possible. So the film kind of became a medium for me to answer that question, and it was also my graduation film. So in a
Oh,
way, it felt like, okay, the end of a journey for me. I had been in Berlin for a while, and to end that journey, I wanted to answer that question. So I approached it in this broad manner. Where do I come from? And at that time, I must say that, I, for some reason, by some strange coincidences, I had been reading a lot about various things, but largely like the resistance movements of our countries, their histories. And I was shocked at the fact that my formal education had given me so little of this background. I followed my own instinct of who to read and where to go for that material, and I read a lot. I mean, I can't tell you, or I can't, but one book that was very influential was, I suppose, Nandini Sundar's, the burning forest, because she writes with an urgency that I really like. And clearly she's not right, like, she's not trying to give you a clear picture. It's just fragments, and you're kind of like, encountering many lives over there. And I think that that's the format then that I also adopted for my film, that it's going to be about many lives, and you're going to encounter them, and perhaps you can't answer everything, and perhaps you can't delve into each story, but that's what you're going to do. And then, my growing up in Indore, I would say that I was, in a way, because I was studying in Berlin, returning to Indore, and that Indore was no longer the place that I had grown up in. And so that kind of I had very many mixed reactions to being in Indore, because it had changed so completely. And all the haunted, kind of apocalyptic architecture that had come up, and how everything was, just okay, developed, but in this half finished way. And all of that kind of played very heavily into that. And I would say that I belong to a family of lawyers, so all, you know struggle, and people struggles every day. These are things that I, through my parents and environment, kind of have a glimpse of. Yeah.
one of the things, I mean, I think I wrote to you after I kind of found the synopsis of the film floating online, and I was attracted to it because I have a personal sort of investment and interest in narratives of the insurgency and the civil war that have been taking place, and the complicatedness and the suffering of the people who get caught in the crossfires. And so that was when I read the synopsis, and I told you about this was the first thing that sort of drew me, and then I wrote to you about it. But the other thing, that the thing that that was completely sort of unexpected for me was the was the formal logic of the film, right? This was complete. This I was taken by surprise. In fact, the, it seemed like there was apart from the political narrative, there was also a kind of a dismantling of time that was happening through the film, and a sort of a questioning of the formal logic of storytelling, of linear time. Could you tell us a bit about how and why you decided to kind of combine this sort of exploration, a more philosophical exploration of one kind, with this very sort of a very political narrative?
Yes, so for me, this juxtaposition was quite interesting. And formally, I think that obviously formal questions of film interest me as much as a filmmaker as the content that I'm dealing with. And of course, I know that formal, like it's not to be separated, but this collision of taking something very political and concrete, and then the formal idea that I had, that actually the lived reality of this is 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 it spans a time that I cannot tell. The oppression of peoples and people, it's so long lasting. I mean, it's not the 60s and it's not the 70s, it's not the 80s, it's not the 90s, it's not the 2000s. So it's so long lasting, and where can I find that formal way to tackle that? And so I said, okay, I'm going to treat this as one time, and even the emotional, whatever there is, or the emotional reality as one time. And of course, when I told my, my supervisors and my script consultant, past, present, future, dream, inner reality, all of it is one time. and
Yes.
and then they said, okay, you want to make a mirror, and go ahead, you can try it, but there's a great chance of failure. And of course there was, I mean, I don't think that there are so many things that I in my film I would have done differently, but it was it was a big challenge to take it up, and I did it with the conviction, because this is a long story. It's too long a story for me to tell, so I had to deal with that.
And somehow, I mean, this is my second viewing of the film, and what works out quite beautifully, or is the fact that this kind of displacement of time, and things happening on the same plane, as it were, also creates like this. In any case, the word belonging, for instance, keeps reappearing in the film, right? About this idea of belonging, and somehow it is the crisis of belonging. And so it seems that even within the formal logic of the film, this the the characters appear like they are searching for a point within even the narrative of the film in which they can place themselves, and that I think really is very beautiful and rich. Um, I wanted to ask you another quick question. Just one more. Neeraj, how much time do we have? Okay, so maybe just one more quick question, because I think the curfew is beginning here soon.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
One of the things that, again, in the film, that I think that to my mind the film does very eloquently, is that there is this kind of, when we hear of this, and even when one speaks of the crisis within central India, one often refers to it as, even in the short text that accompanies your film, I've used the word hinterland, but I put it in scare quotes, and one talks about it as happening in the forest. But what you've done also is that there is again a collapsing of landscapes. So what is in the forest is also in the city, and what is in the city is also in the forest. So the life of the young woman, for instance, it begins from a certain place and it enters the city, and the violence from the city. Can you? I mean, was this, how conscious a decision was this? Can you tell me a bit about where you're coming from when you decided to kind of also place it in these two landscapes simultaneously?
Yes, and I think this, this urban rural divide, which we tend to think of as a divide, the more you read, the more you understand, or the more you like kind of the more you explore, actually, even when I was going for recce's and I was looking for these places, it felt to me that, okay, who is this, like we experienced in, like, in during lockdown, the person who's going back to his village is also the same person who occupies and is the workforce, I mean, is a large part of our city and its economy and how it works, and is the same person. And so to kind of like to not, I mean, there is no like urban rural, there's no divide, there's on in that sense there's a fluidity. And I even in my research, or even in recce's, which is only to go and find the places that for their film, you were continuously encountering this, like, back and forth, back and forth. And so my the settings of my film, where the forest is actually situated, are not very far from the city.
Right.
They are a drive of 40 minutes from the city, and they are but entirely other environments, where the effects and the interplay between those two things is so deep. And so I think that as urban, like, there is, and I, in a way, the larger thing that I'm trying to do or the one thing that I'm trying to do is to connect things. And so it made sense to connect the urban and the rural, and to not uh, and to not treat them as separate, separate realities.
Yeah. I realized that what I was trying to pose as a question was in fact a comment, the previous one. So thank you for sort of bravely marching on. But I think this is one of the, for me, as we have to quickly sort of wish each other goodbye here. One of the things that that seems like a very urgent commentary that I received from the film is the idea that the problematic begins when we try to kind of see the city and the forest, and we see these as separate entities. When things that happen in the forest are hidden from us and things that happen in the city are not, and this kind of this collapsing between the two is perhaps one of the most urgent things that I receive from the city, because what happens one place will in fact affect the other, and the sort of being part of the same ecosystem, the larger ecosystem. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm doing my second film. I'm researching and preparing my second film, and I'm in rural Orissa, and I cannot tell you how close that is to issues that we as urban citizens are facing. I mean, it is it's not a they are battling with rising sea levels, but the lack of drinking water at the same time, and we are battling this lack of drinking water. I mean, there are so many things that connect us, and that make sense when we say it's one ecosystem in which we are interacting with each other.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. Udita, thanks a lot for this really swift Q&A, and for sharing your film with us this evening. And we hope to keep these conversations going. But for now, goodbye.
Bye. See you. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.